The morning sun cast long shadows across the training grounds of Fort Benning, Georgia, as a group of young military cadets gathered for what they thought would be another routine physical training session. They stretched their muscles, adjusted their gear, and exchanged the usual banter that comes with being young, fit, and confident in their abilities. But today would be different. Today, they would meet someone who would completely shatter their assumptions about age, capability, and what it truly means to be a soldier. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Among the sea of fresh faces and athletic builds stood a woman who immediately caught their attention, not for her imposing physical presence, but for what seemed to be her complete lack of it. At 52 years old, Colonel Sarah Mitchell had graying hair pulled back in a regulation bun, laugh lines etched around her eyes, and a frame that, while clearly in shape, didn't scream physical specimen to the untrained eye. The cadets, most of whom were barely out of their teens, couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between themselves and this woman who appeared to be old enough to be their grandmother. The whispers started almost immediately. "Is that really our instructor?" one cadet muttered to another. "She's got to be at least 50, came the reply, followed by barely suppressed chuckles. They had expected a drill sergeant straight out of central casting, someone whose very presence would command respect through sheer physical intimidation. Instead, they got what appeared to be someone's mom who had somehow wandered onto the training grounds. Colonel Mitchell had heard it all before. In her 28 years of military service, she had encountered every form of skepticism, doubt, and outright dismissal that could be thrown at a female officer. But age discrimination? That was a relatively new challenge, one that had become more pronounced as she climbed the ranks and the years accumulated. The young soldiers under her command saw her gray hair and mature features and made assumptions about her capabilities that she had grown tired of constantly having to disprove. But Sarah Mitchell wasn't just any officer. She was a decorated veteran who had served multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, a woman who had earned her stripes through blood, sweat, and unwavering determination. She had been awarded the Bronze Star for her actions during a particularly intense firefight in Fallujah, where she had led her unit through enemy territory to rescue wounded soldiers. She had completed Ranger School at the age of 35, making her one of the first women to do so, and certainly the oldest in her class at the time. The cadets didn't know any of this. Of course, all they saw was a middle-aged woman who looked like she should be baking cookies rather than leading military exercises. Their assumptions were about to cost them dearly. "Good morning, cadets," Colonel Mitchell said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that comes from years of command experience. "Today we're going to be conducting a full-gear combat readiness exercise. That means full battle rattle helmet, body armor, weapon, pack, the works. We'll be covering 8 miles of varied terrain, including hills, obstacles, and combat scenarios." The cadets straightened up, suddenly more focused. 8 miles in full gear wasn't a joke, even for young, fit soldiers. It was a grueling test of endurance, strength, and mental toughness that would push them to their limits. "Ma'am," one of the braver cadets spoke up, "will you be observing from the vehicle?" It was a reasonable question. Most senior officers their age would indeed follow the exercise from the comfort of a Humvee, barking orders through a radio while the young soldiers did the actual physical work. Colonel Mitchell smiled, not the warm, grandmotherly smile the cadets might have expected, but the kind of smile that predators give their prey right before they strike. "Negative, cadet. I'll be running with you. In fact, I'll be setting the pace." The silence that followed was deafening. The cadets exchanged glances, some fighting back smirks, others looking genuinely concerned. They were about to embark on one of the most challenging physical exercises in military training, and their leader was a woman who looked like she should be worried about keeping up, not setting the pace. Little did they know they were about to witness something that would completely redefine their understanding of what military excellence looked like. As they began suiting up in their gear, the weight of their assumptions became literal. The full battle rattle weighed approximately 60 pounds, not counting their weapon and ammunition. The vest alone was restrictive, making breathing more difficult and every movement more labored. The helmet, while protective, created a tunnel vision effect that made navigation more challenging. The pack, loaded with everything a soldier might need in combat, pulled at their shoulders and back with every step. Colonel Mitchell donned her gear with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this thousands of times. Every strap was adjusted perfectly, every piece of equipment positioned for maximum effectiveness and minimum hindrance. She moved with the fluid grace of a professional, checking her weapon, adjusting her pack, and ensuring everything was secure. The cadets, meanwhile, fumbled with unfamiliar buckles and straps, their inexperience showing in every awkward movement. "All right, cadets," Colonel Mitchell announced, her voice slightly muffled by her helmet, but still carrying clearly across the formation. "We move out in 2 minutes. Remember, this isn't just about physical fitness. We're simulating combat conditions. So stay alert, stay focused, and stay together. Anyone who falls behind puts the entire unit at risk." The cadets nodded, some with more confidence than others. They had trained for this moment, had prepared both physically and mentally for the challenge ahead. But as they lined up at the starting point, looking at their seemingly out-of-place leader, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to be part of something completely unexpected. What happened in the first 30 seconds of that exercise would begin a transformation that none of them saw coming. The morning air was crisp as the formation moved out from the staging area, Colonel Mitchell taking point with the confidence of someone who had done this exercise more times than she could count. The cadets fell in behind her, their initial skepticism still evident in their casual pace and relaxed demeanor. They had settled into what they considered a comfortable jogging speed, one that they assumed would be appropriate for keeping pace with their older instructor. That assumption lasted exactly 30 seconds. Colonel Mitchell's pace was relentless. What had started as what the cadets thought would be a leisurely jog quickly transformed into a punishing run that had them struggling to maintain formation. Her legs moved with mechanical precision, each step calculated and efficient. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary energy expenditure, just the smooth, deadly efficiency of a machine built for endurance. "Pick up the pace, cadets." Her voice carried back over the sound of boots hitting pavement. "This is supposed to be a warm-up. Warm-up?" The cadets exchanged panicked glances as they realized they were already pushing themselves harder than they had expected to run for the entire 8 miles. Their breathing was becoming labored, sweat was beginning to form under their helmets, and they hadn't even reached the first mile marker. Cadet Johnson, a former high school track star who had come into the military with considerable confidence in his running ability, found himself struggling to maintain his position in the formation. The woman he had dismissed as grandma just minutes earlier was not only keeping pace with him, but was actively pulling away from the group. Her form was perfect, back straight, arms pumping in rhythm, breathing controlled and steady. "How is she doing this?" he gasped to the cadet running beside him. "I don't know," came the equally breathless reply, "but I'm dying back here." The first mile passed in what felt like minutes rather than the leisurely pace they had anticipated. Colonel Mitchell showed no signs of fatigue, no indication that the weight of her gear or the pace she was setting was affecting her in the slightest. If anything, she seemed to be holding back, occasionally glancing over her shoulder to ensure the cadets were still within sight. The second mile brought them to the beginning of the hill country, where the real challenge would begin. The terrain shifted from flat pavement to rolling hills covered in loose gravel and scattered obstacles. This was where the exercise was designed to separate the prepared from the unprepared. where cardiovascular fitness had to combine with mental toughness to overcome the additional challenge of navigating difficult terrain while carrying a combat load. Colonel Mitchell attacked the first hill with the same relentless efficiency she had shown on the flat ground. Her pace never wavered, her form never deteriorated. She seemed to glide up the incline while the cadets behind her began to struggle in earnest. The combination of the increased grade, the weight of their gear, and the pace she was setting created a perfect storm of physical challenge that was pushing them to their limits. "This is insane," Cadet Williams muttered, his usually cocky demeanor replaced by genuine concern about his ability to complete the exercise. "She's not even breathing hard." It was true. While the cadets were beginning to show obvious signs of fatigue-heavy breathing, sweat-stained uniforms, and increasingly labored movements, Colonel Mitchell maintained the same steady rhythm she had started with. Her breathing was controlled, her posture remained upright, and her pace never faltered. The third mile brought them to the obstacle course portion of the exercise, where they would have to navigate a series of barriers, walls, and challenges while maintaining their combat load. This was typically where the exercise became as much about technique and problem-solving as it was about physical fitness. The cadets had trained extensively on these obstacles, learning the most efficient ways to clear each barrier while carrying their gear. Colonel Mitchell approached the first obstacle, a 6-foot wall that required soldiers to climb over while carrying their full combat load, with the same matter-of-fact efficiency she had shown throughout the run. Without breaking stride, she planted her foot on the wall's support beam, hauled herself up with her arms, and swung her legs over in one fluid motion. The entire sequence took less than 10 seconds. The cadets, meanwhile, struggled with the same obstacle. Their earlier confidence had been replaced by the harsh reality of physical exhaustion. What should have been a routine obstacle clearance became a laborious process of trial and error as they fought against their own fatigue and the weight of their gear. "Move, move." Colonel Mitchell called from the far side of the obstacle. "The enemy isn't going to wait for you to catch your breath." Her words carried the weight of experience. This wasn't just an exercise for her. It was a simulation of the real combat situations she had faced throughout her career. Every obstacle, every challenge, every moment of the exercise was designed to prepare these young soldiers for the reality of warfare, where physical fitness could mean the difference between life and death. As they progressed through the obstacle course, the gap between Colonel Mitchell and the cadets began to widen. She cleared each barrier with textbook precision, never wasting motion or energy, while the cadets struggled to maintain even basic competency. Their initial dismissal of her capabilities had been replaced by grudging respect, then amazement, and finally something approaching awe. "How is she doing this?" Cadet Martinez asked as he struggled over a rope climb, his arms shaking with exhaustion. "I don't know," came the reply from Cadet Thompson, who was barely managing to keep up with the group. "But I'm starting to think we might have underestimated her." The understatement of the century was beginning to dawn on them all, but their education in humility was just beginning. As they struggled through the second mile, breathing heavily and sweating profusely, Colonel Mitchell maintained her relentless pace with machine-like precision. The cadets had no idea that she was actually holding back, and that the real test of their assumptions was still to come. By the fourth mile, the transformation in the cadets' attitude was complete. The cocky young soldiers who had started the exercise with smirks and sideways glances had been replaced by a group of increasingly desperate individuals who were beginning to realize they were witnessing something extraordinary. Colonel Mitchell wasn't just keeping up with them, she was dominating them in every measurable way. The terrain had grown more challenging as they progressed through the exercise. What had started as rolling hills had evolved into steep climbs and treacherous descents that tested not only their cardiovascular fitness, but their balance, coordination, and mental toughness. The loose gravel and scattered rocks made every step a potential hazard, especially when combined with the weight of their gear and the accumulating fatigue of the run. Colonel Mitchell navigated these challenges with the sure-footedness of someone who had been doing this for decades. Her movements were economical and precise, never wasting energy on unnecessary corrections or hesitations. She seemed to anticipate every obstacle, every change in terrain, every challenge before it appeared. This wasn't just physical fitness. It was the kind of tactical awareness that comes from years of real-world experience. "She's not even sweating," Cadet Rodriguez observed, his own uniform soaked with perspiration despite the cool morning air. How is that even possible? It was a good question. While the cadets were showing obvious signs of physical stress, heavy breathing, flushed faces, and the telltale signs of heat exhaustion beginning to set in, Colonel Mitchell appeared as fresh as she had at the starting line. Her uniform was still crisp, her breathing remained controlled, and her pace never wavered. The 5th mile brought them to the combat simulation portion of the exercise, where they would have to navigate a series of scenarios designed to replicate real battlefield conditions. This was where the exercise transitioned from pure physical fitness to tactical thinking, where soldiers had to make split-second decisions while under physical stress. The first scenario involved a simulated ambush, where the cadets had to react to enemy fire while maintaining their formation and continuing to advance. In a real combat situation, this would be a life-or-death moment where training, instinct, and leadership would determine who went home and who didn't. Colonel Mitchell's response to the simulated ambush was immediate and textbook perfect. She dropped to a tactical position, assessed the situation, and began issuing orders with the calm authority of someone who had done this for real. Her voice carried clearly over the sound of simulated gunfire and explosions, providing clear direction to the cadets who were struggling to process what was happening while dealing with their own physical exhaustion. Contact left. Take cover and return fire. Martinez, flank right. Johnson, establish a base of fire. Her orders were crisp, clear, and delivered with the kind of confidence that comes from having survived similar situations in actual combat. The cadets, meanwhile, were struggling to think clearly through their fatigue. The combination of physical exhaustion and the stress of the combat simulation was overwhelming their ability to process information and make tactical decisions. What should have been automatic responses drilled into them through months of training became confused and hesitant actions. "This is what combat is like," Colonel Mitchell explained as they moved through the scenario. "You don't get to rest. You don't get to catch your breath, and you certainly don't get to question your leader's ability to keep up. In the real world, your life depends on your fitness, your training, and your ability to think clearly under pressure." The lesson was hitting home in a way that no classroom instruction or theoretical discussion ever could. These cadets were experiencing firsthand what it meant to be a soldier, and they were doing it while being led by someone they had initially dismissed as too old and too weak to be effective. As they moved to the 6th mile, the physical demands of the exercise were beginning to take their toll on even the fittest cadets. The combination of the weight of their gear, the challenging terrain, and the relentless pace had pushed them well beyond their comfort zone. Several cadets were beginning to show signs of serious fatigue, their movements becoming increasingly labored and their breathing more erratic. Colonel Mitchell, however, showed no signs of slowing down. If anything, she seemed to be gaining strength as the exercise progressed. Her movements remained fluid and efficient. Her breathing stayed controlled, and her pace never faltered. She was like a machine designed specifically for this kind of challenge, built to endure and excel under conditions that would break lesser individuals. "Ma'am," Cadet Johnson called out, his voice strained with exhaustion, "can we take a water break?" Colonel Mitchell's response was immediate and non-negotiable. "Negative, Cadet. The enemy doesn't call timeout so you can hydrate. You drink on the move or you don't drink at all." The harshness of her response might have seemed unreasonable to someone who had never experienced combat, but every veteran in the group understood the logic. In a real combat situation, stopping to rest wasn't an option. Soldiers had to be able to function at peak capacity regardless of their physical state, and that kind of resilience could only be developed through training that pushed them beyond their perceived limits. As they crested another hill, the cadets got their first glimpse of the remaining terrain they would have to cover. The path ahead was a series of steep climbs and descents that would test every muscle in their bodies and every ounce of mental toughness they could muster. For many of them, it was a daunting sight that filled them with dread. Colonel Mitchell looked at the same terrain with the calm assessment of a professional. This was just another challenge to overcome, another obstacle to navigate with the same systematic approach she had applied to every other aspect of the exercise. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The cadets were about to learn that their ordeal was far from over. But what they didn't yet realize was that Colonel Mitchell was just getting started. As they approached the 4th-mile marker, something extraordinary was about to happen that would shatter every remaining assumption they held about age, endurance, and what the human body was truly capable of achieving. The 7th mile marked a turning point in the exercise that would be remembered by every cadet present for the rest of their military careers. What had begun as a routine training exercise had evolved into something much more profound, a masterclass in leadership, endurance, and the dangerous consequences of making assumptions about people based on their appearance. Colonel Mitchell's performance had transcended mere physical fitness. She wasn't just keeping up with soldiers 30 years her junior. She was demonstrating a level of tactical awareness, physical conditioning, and mental toughness that few of them had ever witnessed. Every obstacle she encountered was overcome with the same methodical precision that had characterized her entire career. Every challenge was met with the calm confidence of someone who had faced far worse and survived. The cadets, meanwhile, were experiencing a collective humbling that would reshape their understanding of what it meant to be a soldier. Cadet Williams, who had started the exercise with jokes about grandma, was now struggling to maintain even basic competency. His earlier arrogance had been replaced by a growing respect for the woman who was making this look effortless. "I can't believe I thought she was going to slow us down," he gasped to Cadet Martinez, who was in equally rough shape. "She's not even breathing hard." The observation was accurate. While the cadets were showing clear signs of physical distress, labored breathing, excessive sweating, and increasingly unsteady movements, Colonel Mitchell maintained the same controlled rhythm she had established at the beginning of the exercise. Her breathing remained steady, her form perfect, and her pace relentless. The 8th mile brought them to the final phase of the exercise, a series of advanced obstacles that were designed to push experienced soldiers to their absolute limits. These weren't the basic barriers they had encountered earlier. These were complex challenges that required not just physical strength, but problem-solving ability, teamwork, and the kind of mental clarity that becomes increasingly difficult to maintain under extreme physical stress. The first obstacle was a rope traverse over a simulated ravine. Soldiers had to cross a 30-foot gap using only a rope while carrying their full combat load. It was a test of upper body strength, core stability, and mental toughness that had broken many soldiers, who were far fitter than most of these cadets. Colonel Mitchell approached the obstacle with the same systematic assessment she had applied to every other challenge. She tested the rope, adjusted her gear for optimal balance, and began her traverse with movements that were both powerful and efficient. Her progression across the rope was steady and controlled, never rushed but never hesitant. She reached the far side in what seemed like seconds, while the cadets were still figuring out how to begin. "Your turn, cadets," she called from the other side. Remember, in combat, this could be the difference between reaching your objective and becoming a casualty. The first cadet to attempt the traverse was Johnson, the former track star who had started the exercise with considerable confidence in his physical abilities. He grabbed the rope with determination, but within seconds it became clear that his upper body strength, already depleted by the 7 miles of running and obstacle navigation, wasn't sufficient for the task. He made it halfway across before his grip began to fail, his arms shaking with exhaustion as he struggled to maintain his hold. "Don't give up, Johnson." Colonel Mitchell's voice carried across the gap. "Use your legs. Wrap them around the rope and take some of the weight off. Your arms." Her coaching was immediate and effective. Johnson adjusted his technique, managed to complete the traverse, and collapsed on the far side, his chest heaving with exhaustion. The other cadets watched this exchange with growing amazement. Not only was Colonel Mitchell completing these obstacles with ease, but she was also providing expert instruction to help them overcome their own limitations. One by one, the cadets attempted the traverse. Some succeeded on their first try, others required multiple attempts, and a few needed direct assistance from Colonel Mitchell to complete the obstacle. Throughout it all, she remained patient, encouraging, and supportive, while never once compromising the standard that needed to be met. "This is what leadership looks like," she explained as she helped Cadet Rodriguez adjust his grip. "It's not about being the strongest or the fastest. It's about being competent enough to lead by example and experienced enough to help others succeed." The lesson was profound and immediate. These cadets had started the exercise with preconceived notions about age, gender, and physical capability. They were ending it with a completely transformed understanding of what real leadership looked like. The next obstacle was a wall climb that required soldiers to scale a 12-foot barrier while carrying their full combat load. This was pure upper body strength combined with technique, and it was typically where the exercise claimed its highest casualty rate. Many soldiers who had made it through the previous challenges would fail here, unable to overcome the combination of height, weight, and exhaustion. Colonel Mitchell approached the wall with the same methodical precision she had shown throughout the exercise. She identified the best handholds, positioned her feet for maximum leverage, and began her ascent with movements that were both powerful and efficient. Her technique was flawless, her timing perfect, and her execution so smooth that it looked almost effortless. The cadets watched in stunned silence as she reached the top of the wall in what seemed like seconds, swung her legs over, and dropped to the ground on the other side with the fluid grace of someone half her age. It was a display of physical capability that challenged every assumption they had made about age and fitness. "The wall isn't about brute strength," she called out as the cadets prepared for their attempts. "It's about technique, timing, and the mental toughness to push through when your body is telling you to quit. Find your handholds, trust your training, and don't overthink it." Her instruction proved invaluable as the cadets attempted the wall. Those who followed her technical advice found success, while those who relied purely on strength struggled and often failed. It was another lesson in the value of experience over raw physical ability. As they moved through the final obstacles of the 8th mile, the cadets were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Colonel Mitchell wasn't just completing a training exercise. She was demonstrating the kind of exceptional capability that defined true military excellence. The final mile of the exercise would become the stuff of legend among the cadets who participated in it. Word of Colonel Mitchell's performance had already begun to spread through the base, carried by instructors and observers who had witnessed the unprecedented display of endurance and leadership. What had started as a routine training exercise was becoming a defining moment that would be discussed in military circles for years to come. The terrain for the final mile was the most challenging, yet a series of steep climbs and descents through heavily wooded areas that required not just physical fitness, but advanced navigation skills and the ability to maintain tactical awareness while under extreme physical stress. This was where the Exercise was designed to separate the truly exceptional from the merely competent. Colonel Mitchell attacked the final mile with the same relentless efficiency she had shown throughout the exercise, but now there was something different in her approach. She wasn't just maintaining her pace, she was actually increasing it. After 8 miles of punishing terrain and obstacles, she was getting stronger rather than weaker, drawing on reserves of endurance that seemed limitless. Cadets, meanwhile, were reaching their breaking point. The combination of the challenging terrain, the weight of their gear, and the accumulating fatigue of the exercise was pushing them well beyond their comfort zone. Several were showing signs of serious exhaustion, their movements becoming increasingly labored and their decision-making compromised by physical stress. "I don't understand how she's doing this," Cadet Thompson muttered, his voice strained with exhaustion. "She should be tired. She should be slowing down. She should be human." It was a sentiment shared by every cadet in the group. Colonel Mitchell's performance had transcended normal human limitations and entered the realm of the extraordinary. She wasn't just fit for her age. She was demonstrating a level of physical capability that would have been impressive in someone half her age. The secret to her performance lay in decades of preparation and a training regimen that most soldiers would consider excessive. Colonel Mitchell had been preparing for exercises like this her entire career, building not just cardiovascular fitness, but the kind of functional strength and mental toughness that could only be developed through years of dedicated training. Her daily routine included 5 a.m. run regardless of weather conditions, followed by strength training that focused on functional movements rather than aesthetic muscle building. She practiced military-specific skills like rope climbing, wall scaling, and obstacle navigation with the same dedication that professional athletes brought to their sports. Most importantly, she had developed the mental discipline to push through physical discomfort and maintain peak performance, even when her body was screaming at her to stop. As they entered the wooded portion of the final mile, the exercise took on a different character. The thick canopy blocked out most of the sunlight, creating an environment that was both claustrophobic and disorienting. The terrain was uneven and treacherous, with roots, rocks, and fallen branches creating obstacles that had to be navigated. While maintaining formation and tactical awareness, Colonel Mitchell moved through this environment with the confidence of someone who had spent countless hours in similar conditions during her combat deployments. Her movements were sure and efficient, never wasting energy on unnecessary corrections or hesitations. She seemed to anticipate every obstacle, every change in terrain, every challenge before it appeared. "Stay alert, cadets," she called back to the group. "This is where good soldiers get hurt because they're too focused on their own fatigue to pay attention to their surroundings. In combat, a turned ankle or a fall can get you and your teammates killed." Her words carried the weight of experience. This wasn't theoretical instruction. It was practical wisdom gained through years of real-world military operations. The cadets understood that they were receiving training from someone who had been tested in the crucible of actual combat and had emerged stronger for a dot as they navigated the wooded terrain. The gap between Colonel Mitchell and the cadets began to widen significantly. She was moving with the fluid grace of someone who was completely in her element, while the cadets were struggling to maintain even basic competency. Their initial dismissal of her capabilities had been replaced by something approaching awe. "She's not slowing down," Cadet Martinez observed, his voice filled with amazement. "After 8 miles, she's actually getting faster." It was true. Colonel Mitchell's pace had increased noticeably during the final mile, as if the previous 8 miles had been nothing more than a warm-up for the real challenge ahead. Her movements were becoming more fluid, more efficient, more powerful. She was like a machine that had reached its optimal operating temperature and was now performing at peak capacity. The final obstacle of the exercise was a culmination of all the challenges they had faced throughout the day. It was a complex series of barriers, walls, and technical challenges that had to be completed in sequence while maintaining full combat readiness. This was where the exercise was designed to push soldiers to their absolute limits and beyond. Colonel Mitchell approached the final obstacle complex with the same systematic assessment she had applied to every other challenge throughout the day. She studied the layout, identified the most efficient route, and began her approach with movements that were both powerful and precise. Her progression through the complex was like watching a master craftsman at work, every movement calculated and efficient. The cadets watched in stunned silence as she navigated the complex with what appeared to be effortless grace. What should have been a grueling test of strength, endurance, and technical skill looked like nothing more than a routine training exercise for someone of her caliber. "This is impossible," Cadet Williams whispered. "She's making this look easy." It wasn't easy, of course. Colonel Mitchell was pushing herself just as hard as any of the cadets, but her years of training and experience had given her the tools to make it look effortless. She had developed the kind of functional fitness that went far beyond what could be measured in a gym or on a fitness test. She had built the kind of mental toughness that allowed her to push through physical discomfort and maintain peak performance, even when her body was telling her to stop. As she completed the final obstacle and stood waiting for the cadets to follow, Colonel Mitchell allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. She had proven her point more effectively than any speech or demonstration could have accomplished. The moment Colonel Mitchell crossed the finish line of the 8-mile exercise, she turned around and began walking back toward the cadets who were still struggling through the final obstacles. Her movement was steady and purposeful, showing no signs of the exhaustion that should have been overwhelming after such a demanding physical challenge. If anything, she appeared refreshed, as if the exercise had been energizing rather than depleting. Cadets, meanwhile, were in various stages of physical and mental breakdown. Some were pushing through the final obstacles with grim determination. Others were struggling to maintain even basic competency, and a few were showing signs of serious fatigue that bordered on dangerous. The transformation from the confident group that had started the exercise to the humbled individuals approaching the finish line was complete and profound. "Come on, cadets," Colonel Mitchell called out as she moved back down the course to assist those who were struggling. "You've made it this far. Don't quit on me now." Her voice carried both encouragement and authority, the kind of leadership that inspired soldiers to push beyond their perceived limitations. But more than her words, it was her actions that were making the deepest impression. Here was a woman who had just completed one of the most challenging exercises in military training, and instead of resting or celebrating her achievement, she was immediately focused on helping others succeed. Cadet Johnson, who had started the exercise with considerable confidence in his physical abilities, was now struggling to complete the final wall climb. His arms were shaking with exhaustion, his breathing was labored, and his technique was deteriorating rapidly. It was clear that he was at the end of his physical resources. "Johnson," Colonel Mitchell called out as she approached his position. "Remember what I taught you about the wall. It's not about brute strength. Use your legs, find your rhythm, and trust your training." She positioned herself below the wall, ready to provide assistance if needed, but more importantly, she was providing the kind of calm, confident leadership that could make the difference between success and failure. Her presence alone seemed to give Johnson the mental boost he needed to complete the obstacle. One by one, Colonel Mitchell assisted each cadet who was struggling with the final challenges. She provided technical instruction, physical assistance when necessary, and the kind of encouragement that can only come from someone who has been tested in similar circumstances and emerged victorious. Her leadership style was neither harsh nor condescending, but rather the patient, professional approach of someone who understood that developing soldiers was more important than demonstrating personal superiority. As the last cadet crossed the finish line, Colonel Mitchell called the group to formation. The cadets stood at attention, their uniforms soaked with sweat, their faces flushed with exhaustion, but their eyes bright with a new understanding of what they had just witnessed. They had started the exercise with preconceived notions about age, gender, and physical capability. They were ending it with a completely transformed understanding of what real military excellence looked like. "Cadets," Colonel Mitchell began, her voice carrying clearly across the formation. "Today's exercise was designed to test more than just your physical fitness. It was designed to test your assumptions, your judgment, and your ability to recognize true leadership when you see it." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. The cadets stood in silence, each processing the profound lesson they had just received. "When you first saw me this morning, what did you think?" she continued. "Be honest. I've been in the military long enough to know exactly what you were thinking. You saw a middle-aged woman and made assumptions about my capabilities based on my appearance. You thought I would slow you down, that I would be unable to keep up with your youthful energy and fitness." The cadets remained silent, but their faces showed the truth of her words. They had indeed made exactly those assumptions, and they had been spectacularly wrong. "Those assumptions," Colonel Mitchell continued, "could get you killed in combat. The enemy doesn't care about your preconceived notions. They don't care about your stereotypes or your biases. They care about capability, training, and the will to fight. If you underestimate your opponents the way you underestimated me this morning, you won't live long enough to learn from your mistakes." The lesson was profound and immediate. These cadets had experienced firsthand what it meant to make dangerous assumptions about people based on their appearance. They had learned that true capability comes from training, experience, and mental toughness rather than age or gender. "More importantly," she continued, "you've learned something about leadership today. Leadership isn't about being the biggest, the strongest, or the loudest. It's about being the most competent, the most prepared, and the most willing to put the needs of your soldiers ahead of your own comfort. A leader who can't keep up with their troops is no leader at all." The cadets nodded, understanding the deeper message. They had witnessed not just exceptional physical performance, but exceptional leadership. Colonel Mitchell had led from the front, setting the standard rather than simply demanding it from others. She had demonstrated that true leadership meant being willing to do anything she asked of her soldiers, and doing it better than they could. "Your performance today was acceptable," Colonel Mitchell concluded, "but it could have been better. You allowed your assumptions to affect your preparation and your mindset. In the future, remember that the measure of a soldier isn't their age or their appearance. It's their ability to complete the mission regardless of the circumstances." As the cadets were dismissed, they walked away from the exercise fundamentally changed. The woman they had dismissed as grandma had become a figure of respect and admiration. More importantly, they had learned a lesson about judgment, capability, and leadership that would serve them throughout their military careers. The story of Colonel Mitchell's performance that day would spread throughout the base within hours, becoming the stuff of legend among both instructors and cadets. It would be told and retold, each version emphasizing different aspects of her remarkable achievement, but all versions carrying the same fundamental message: never underestimate someone based on their appearance, because true capability comes from within. But the most incredible part of her performance was yet to come, as the final miles would reveal the full extent of what she was truly capable of. The aftermath of Colonel Mitchell's extraordinary performance extended far beyond the immediate group of cadets who had witnessed it firsthand. Within hours of the exercise's completion, word had spread throughout Fort Benning like wildfire, carried by instructors, support staff, and other soldiers who had observed portions of the remarkable display. The story grew with each telling, but the core message remained consistent. A 52-year-old female officer had not only kept pace with cadets, 30 years her junior, but had dominated them in every measurable way. The reaction from the military community was immediate and profound. Younger soldiers who had heard the story found themselves questioning their own assumptions about age, gender, and physical capability. Senior officers who had known Colonel Mitchell for years weren't surprised by her performance, but they were impressed by the impact it had on the next generation of military leaders. "I've been waiting for someone to teach those kids that lesson for years," remarked Colonel James Patterson, Mitchell's immediate superior, when he heard about the exercise. "Sarah's been trying to prove herself to doubters her entire career. The difference is, now she's got the experience and the wisdom to make it look effortless." The cadets themselves were processing the experience in different ways. Some, like Cadet Johnson, were inspired by what they had witnessed and immediately began adjusting their own training regimens to incorporate some of the techniques and approaches they had observed. Others, like Cadet Williams, were struggling with the ego blow of being outperformed so completely by someone they had initially dismissed. "I keep thinking about that moment when she asked if we wanted a water break," Williams confided to his roommate that evening. "We were all dying, and she was just standing there looking like she could do the whole thing again. I've never felt so humbled in my life. The humbling was intentional and necessary." Colonel Mitchell had spent decades watching young soldiers enter the military with inflated egos and dangerous assumptions about their own capabilities. She had seen too many promising careers ended by arrogance, too many missions compromised by soldiers who thought they knew better than their experienced leaders, but the lesson went deeper than just physical fitness or military tactics. Colonel Mitchell had demonstrated something fundamental about human potential and the danger of making assumptions based on appearance. In a society that often equated youth with capability and dismissed older individuals as past their prime, she had shown that experience, training, and mental toughness could overcome any perceived physical disadvantage. The scientific explanation for her performance was complex but understandable. Colonel Mitchell had spent decades building not just cardiovascular fitness, but the kind of functional strength and endurance that could only be developed through years of specific training. Her body had adapted to the demands of military service in ways that went far beyond what could be measured in a standard fitness test. More importantly, she had developed the mental fortitude to push through physical discomfort and maintain peak performance even when her body was telling her to stop. This psychological aspect of physical performance was often overlooked by younger soldiers, who relied primarily on their natural athletic ability rather than mental toughness. Dr. Sarah Crane, a sports physiologist who had studied military fitness for years, explained the phenomenon when she heard about Colonel Mitchell's performance. "What people don't understand is that peak physical performance isn't just about age or natural ability. It's about training specificity, mental toughness, and the kind of functional fitness that can only be developed through years of dedicated practice." A 52-year-old who has been training for military-specific tasks for 3 decades is going to outperform a 22-year-old who has been training for 6 months, regardless of their raw athletic ability. The training regimen that had produced Colonel Mitchell's exceptional performance was both rigorous and intelligent. She had worked with military fitness specialists to develop a program that focused on the specific demands of combat operations, rather than general fitness. Her daily routine included early morning runs in full gear, obstacle course training, and strength work that emphasized functional movements over aesthetic muscle building. But perhaps most importantly, she had never allowed herself to use age as an excuse for declining performance. While many of her peers had gradually reduced their training intensity as they aged, Colonel Mitchell had maintained, and in some cases increased her training load. She understood that in a military context, physical capability wasn't just about personal achievement, it was about the safety and effectiveness of the soldiers under her command. The cadets were beginning to understand this broader context as they processed their experience. They had witnessed not just exceptional individual performance, but exceptional leadership. Colonel Mitchell had demonstrated that true military leaders must be able to do anything they ask of their soldiers, and do it better than their soldiers can. She didn't just outrun us, Cadet Martinez observed during a group discussion that evening. She outran us while teaching us, while helping us, while making sure we all completed the exercise safely. That's not just fitness, that's leadership. The observation was astute and important. Colonel Mitchell's performance had encompassed far more than just physical capability. She had maintained tactical awareness throughout the exercise, provided instruction and assistance to struggling cadets, and ensured that every member of the group completed the challenge safely. It was a masterclass in military leadership that went far beyond simple physical performance. As news of the exercise spread beyond Fort Benning, it began to attract attention from military leaders, fitness experts, and media outlets interested in the broader implications of what had occurred. The story touched on important themes about aging, gender roles in the military, and the importance of not making assumptions about people based on their appearance. Colonel Mitchell herself was characteristically modest about the attention her performance was receiving. When asked about the exercise by a reporter from Army Times, she simply said, "I was doing my job." A leader's job is to set the standard and help their soldiers meet it. That's what I've been doing for 28 years, and that's what I'll continue to do for as long as the Army will have me. But her impact on the cadets who had participated in the exercise was profound and lasting. They had learned lessons about judgment, capability, and leadership that would serve them throughout their military careers and beyond. The ripple effects of Colonel Mitchell's performance continued to spread throughout the military community. In the days and weeks following the exercise, what had started as a routine training session had become a catalyst for broader conversations about age discrimination, physical standards, and the true nature of military leadership. The story was being discussed in mess halls, training facilities, and command centers across the country, each reinforcing the same fundamental message about the danger of making assumptions based on appearance. The cadets who had participated in the exercise found themselves at the center of these conversations, fielding questions from peers, instructors, and superior officers who wanted to understand exactly what they had witnessed. The experience had changed them in ways they were still processing, but the change was undeniable and profound. Cadet Johnson, who had started the exercise as the group's informal leader due to his athletic background, found himself reflecting on the broader implications of what he had experienced. "I've been an athlete my whole life," he confided to his training partner. "I thought I understood what peak performance looked like. But what I saw that day was something completely different. It wasn't just about being fast or strong. It was about being prepared for anything, mentally and physically. The preparation that had enabled Colonel Mitchell's exceptional performance had been decades in the making. Her training philosophy had been shaped by her early experiences as one of the first women to serve in combat roles, when she had to prove herself in environments where she was often the only female soldier. This experience had taught her that being good enough wasn't sufficient. She had to be exceptional to overcome the skepticism and bias she faced. Her daily routine reflected this philosophy. She was typically awake by 4:30 a.m., beginning each day with a meditation session that helped her maintain the mental clarity and focus that had become her trademark. This was followed by a structured workout that combined cardiovascular training, strength work, and military-specific skills practice. Her weekend training sessions often included long-distance hikes in full gear, obstacle course training, and tactical exercises that simulated combat conditions, but the physical training was only part of the equation. Colonel Mitchell had also spent years developing the mental toughness that had enabled her to push through physical discomfort and maintain peak performance under extreme stress. She had worked with sports psychologists, studied meditation techniques, and practiced visualization exercises that helped her maintain focus and composure in challenging situations. the combination of physical preparation and mental discipline had produced a level of capability that transcended normal expectations about age and gender. She had become what military fitness experts called tactical athlete, someone whose training was specifically designed to excel in military-specific tasks rather than general fitness metrics. Dr. Michael Torres, a military fitness specialist who had consulted with Colonel Mitchell on her training program, explained the science behind her performance. The human body is capable of maintaining peak performance well into middle age and beyond, but only if it's trained intelligently and consistently. Colonel Mitchell's program focuses on functional movements, tactical skills, and the kind of mental toughness that can only be developed through years of dedicated practice. The program Dr. Torres had helped design was based on the principle of periodization, structuring training in cycles that built gradually toward peak performance, while avoiding overtraining and injury. Colonel Mitchell's training year was divided into phases that emphasized different aspects of fitness and skill development, ensuring that she would be at her best when it mattered most. But perhaps more importantly, her training philosophy emphasized consistency over intensity. While younger soldiers might rely on their natural athletic ability to compensate for inconsistent training, Colonel Mitchell understood that long-term success required a sustainable approach that could be maintained for decades. This philosophy was beginning to influence the cadets who had witnessed her performance. They were starting to understand that military fitness wasn't just about passing periodic fitness tests, it was about developing the kind of long-term capability that could be sustained throughout an entire career. "She's changed the way I think about training," Cadet Rodriguez admitted during a group discussion. "I used to think that being young and naturally athletic was enough, but she's shown me that real fitness comes from years of smart, consistent training. She's not just fit for her age, she's fit, period." The observation reflected a broader shift in thinking that was occurring throughout the military community. Colonel Mitchell's performance had challenged conventional wisdom about age and physical capability, forcing people to reconsider their assumptions about what was possible for older soldiers. The challenge was particularly significant for military leaders who were facing their own aging process. Many senior officers had accepted declining physical performance as an inevitable part of growing older, gradually reducing their training intensity and accepting lower standards for themselves. Colonel Mitchell's example suggested that this decline was not inevitable, that with proper training and mental discipline, it was possible to maintain peak performance well into middle age and beyond. Lieutenant Colonel David Chun, a 48-year-old infantry officer who had heard about Mitchell's performance, decided to overhaul his own training program as a result. "I'd been making excuses for years," he admitted, "telling myself that slowing down was natural, that I couldn't be expected to keep up with soldiers half my age. Sarah's performance showed me that I was limiting myself with my own assumptions." The impact was extending beyond individual soldiers to influence military training programs and fitness standards. Training officers were beginning to incorporate lessons from Colonel Mitchell's approach into their own programs, emphasizing the importance of functional fitness, mental toughness, and long-term consistency over short-term intensity. The changes were subtle but significant. Training programs began to place greater emphasis on military-specific skills rather than general fitness metrics. Mental toughness training became a more important component of military education. Most importantly, the culture began to shift away from accepting age-related decline as inevitable toward embracing the possibility of sustained excellence throughout an entire career. But these changes were just the beginning of a transformation that would ultimately reach far beyond the military community. Colonel Mitchell's performance had become more than just an impressive individual achievement. It had become a catalyst for broader cultural change within the military community. But the most profound impact would be felt in the days and weeks that followed, as the full implications of what the cadets had witnessed began to reshape their understanding of leadership, capability, and human potential. The transformation in the cadets' attitudes and approach to training became evident in the weeks following their encounter with Colonel Mitchell. The exercise had served as more than just a physical challenge. It had become a watershed moment that fundamentally altered their understanding of what it meant to be a soldier and a leader. The lessons they had learned about judgment, capability, and the danger of making assumptions based on appearance were being integrated into every aspect of their military training. Cadet Johnson, who had initially approached the exercise with confidence, bordering on arrogance, found himself completely restructuring his training philosophy. He began incorporating elements of Colonel Mitchell's approach into his daily routine, focusing on functional movements and military-specific skills rather than just general fitness. More importantly, he began studying the mental aspects of performance, understanding that physical capability alone wasn't sufficient for military excellence. "I used to think that being naturally athletic was enough," he reflected during a training session. "But she showed me that real performance comes from preparation, experience, and the kind of mental toughness that can only be developed through years of dedicated practice." She wasn't just physically prepared, she was mentally prepared for anything we might encounter. The mental preparation that had enabled Colonel Mitchell's exceptional performance was indeed a crucial component of her success. She had spent years developing not just physical fitness, but the psychological tools necessary to maintain peak performance under extreme stress. This included visualization techniques, stress management strategies, and the kind of tactical thinking that allowed her to anticipate and respond to challenges before they became problems. Her approach to mental training was as systematic and disciplined as her physical preparation. She regularly practiced meditation and mindfulness exercises that helped her maintain focus and composure in challenging situations. She studied military history and tactics, constantly expanding her knowledge base and strategic thinking ability. Most importantly, she had developed the kind of self-confidence that comes from knowing she was thoroughly prepared for whatever challenges might arise. This comprehensive approach to preparation was beginning to influence the cadets' own training methods. They were starting to understand that military excellence required more than just physical fitness. It demanded a holistic approach that included mental toughness, tactical knowledge, and the kind of leadership skills that could only be developed through experience and dedicated study. The broader military community was also taking notice of the lessons embedded in Colonel Mitchell's performance. Training programs began incorporating elements of her approach, emphasizing the importance of functional fitness, mental preparation, and long-term consistency. Most importantly, the culture began to shift away from accepting limitations based on age or gender toward embracing the possibility of sustained excellence throughout an entire career. Colonel Patricia Williams, the base commander at Fort Benning, had been following the impact of Mitchell's performance with great interest. "What Sarah accomplished that day wasn't just an individual achievement," she observed. "It was a demonstration of what's possible when we stop limiting ourselves with our own assumptions and start focusing on what really matters: preparation, dedication, and the will to excel." The demonstration had particular significance for female soldiers throughout the military, who had long faced skepticism about their physical capabilities. Colonel Mitchell's performance provided concrete evidence that gender was not a limiting factor in military performance when combined with proper training and mental preparation. Her success was inspiring a new generation of female soldiers to push beyond traditional limitations and pursue excellence in all aspects of military service. Impact extended beyond the military community to influence broader conversations about aging, gender roles, and human potential. Colonel Mitchell's story was being shared in fitness communities, corporate training programs, and educational institutions as an example of what was possible when people refused to accept limitations based on others' assumptions. Sports scientists and fitness experts began studying her training methods, seeking to understand the principles that had enabled her exceptional performance. The research revealed that her success was not the result of any single factor, but rather a combination of intelligent training, mental discipline, and the kind of long-term consistency that few people were willing to commit to. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a researcher who had studied military fitness for over a decade, published a paper analyzing Colonel Mitchell's training approach. The key to Colonel Mitchell's success lies in her understanding that peak performance is not about competing against others, it's about maximizing your own potential through intelligent training and mental preparation. Her program demonstrates that age is not a barrier to excellence when combined with the right approach. The research confirmed what the cadets had observed during their exercise. Colonel Mitchell's success was the result of years of dedicated preparation rather than natural ability or luck. Her training program had been specifically designed to develop the kind of functional fitness and mental toughness required for military excellence, and her consistency in following that program had produced results that seemed almost superhuman. To those who witnessed them, as the weeks passed, the cadets found themselves returning again and again to the lessons they had learned during their encounter with Colonel Mitchell. The experience had given them a new standard of excellence to aspire to, one that went far beyond physical fitness to encompass mental toughness, tactical knowledge, and leadership ability. She didn't just outrun us, Cadet Martinez observed. During a group discussion, she showed us what real military excellence looks like. It's not about being the biggest or the strongest. It's about being the most prepared, the most professional, and the most dedicated to continuous improvement. The observation captured the essence of what they had learned. Colonel Mitchell had demonstrated that true military excellence was not about natural ability or physical advantages. It was about the willingness to commit to a level of preparation and dedication that few people were willing to embrace. Her performance had become a benchmark that would influence their approach to training and leadership for the rest of their careers. But as remarkable as her physical performance had been, it was the lasting impact on these young minds that would prove to be her greatest legacy, the legacy of Colonel Mitchell's extraordinary performance continued to grow and evolve in the months following the exercise, reaching far beyond the original group of cadets who had witnessed it firsthand. Her story had become a powerful example of what was possible when preparation, dedication, and mental toughness were combined with an unwavering commitment to excellence. The impact was being felt throughout the military community and beyond, inspiring individuals to reconsider their own limitations and assumptions about human potential. The cadets themselves had become ambassadors for the lessons they had learned, sharing their experience with fellow soldiers and inspiring others to adopt similar approaches to training and mental preparation. Their transformation from skeptical young soldiers to dedicated students of military excellence was evident in every aspect of their performance and conduct. Cadet Johnson, who had experienced perhaps the most dramatic shift in perspective, had begun developing his own training program based on the principles he had observed in Colonel Mitchell's approach. "I realized that I had been training my body but not my mind," he explained to a group of new cadets. "She showed me that real military excellence requires both physical and mental preparation, and that the mental component is often more important than the physical." The mental component of Colonel Mitchell's success had indeed been crucial to her performance. Her ability to maintain focus and composure under extreme physical stress, to make tactical decisions while exhausted, and to provide leadership and instruction to struggling cadets, all demonstrated the kind of mental toughness that could only be developed through years of dedicated practice. Her approach to mental training included regular meditation and mindfulness exercises, visualization techniques that helped her prepare for challenging situations, and stress management strategies that enabled her to maintain peak performance under pressure. She had also developed the kind of self-confidence that comes from knowing she was thoroughly prepared for whatever challenges might arise. The holistic approach to preparation that had enabled Colonel Mitchell's success was beginning to influence Military training programs throughout the country. Training officers were incorporating elements of her methodology into their own programs, emphasizing the importance of mental preparation alongside physical fitness. The cultural shift was subtle but significant, moving away from a focus on raw physical ability toward a more comprehensive understanding of military excellence. The broader implications of Colonel Mitchell's performance extended beyond the military community to influence discussions about aging, gender roles, and human potential in civilian contexts. Her story was being shared in corporate training programs, educational institutions, and fitness communities as an example of what was possible when people refused to accept limitations based on others' assumptions. Dr. Robert Chun, a leading expert on human performance and aging, had been following Colonel Mitchell's story with great interest. "What makes her performance so remarkable," he observed, "is not just that she outperformed soldiers 30 years younger, but that she did it while maintaining the highest standards of professionalism and leadership. She demonstrated that experience and wisdom can more than compensate for any perceived physical disadvantages." The demonstration had particular significance for older professionals in all fields who had been facing age discrimination or had accepted declining performance as an inevitable part of aging. Colonel Mitchell's example suggested that with proper preparation and mental discipline, it was possible to maintain peak performance well into middle age and beyond. The scientific research that followed her performance confirmed many of the principles she had been applying in her training. Studies showed that functional fitness, mental toughness, and long-term consistency were more important factors in sustained performance than raw physical ability or age. The research provided a scientific foundation for what Colonel Mitchell had been proving through her own example for years. As the first anniversary of the exercise approached, the cadets who had participated in it were preparing for their graduation from the military academy. The experience had fundamentally shaped their understanding of military service and leadership, and they were eager to apply the lessons they had learned in their future assignments. The graduation ceremony itself would include a special recognition of Colonel Mitchell's contribution to their development, acknowledging the profound impact her example had made on their military education. But perhaps more importantly, each of the cadets carried with them a transformed understanding of what it meant to be a soldier and a leader. "She taught us that leadership isn't about commanding from the rear," Cadet Williams reflected as he prepared for graduation. "It's about leading from the front, setting the standard, and being willing to do anything you ask of your soldiers. That lesson will stay with me for the rest of my career." The lesson was indeed profound and lasting. Colonel Mitchell had demonstrated that true military leadership required not just authority but competence, not just rank but respect, and not just commands but example. Her performance had become a benchmark that would influence these young soldiers throughout their careers. As the cadets prepared to leave the academy and begin their service as commissioned officers, they carried with them the knowledge that excellence was not about age, gender, or natural ability. It was about preparation, dedication, and the willingness to push beyond perceived limitations. Colonel Mitchell had shown them that with the right approach, anything was possible. The story of the cadets who called her Grandma until she outran them all in full gear had become more than just an inspiring anecdote. It had become a powerful lesson about the danger of making assumptions, the importance of preparation, and the true nature of military excellence. It was a lesson that would continue to influence soldiers and leaders for generations to come. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.